Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for August 11th, 2022. What's emerging is a perfect storm of crises as we see maximum chaos coming at us. And yet the populations of most of the West are sleepwalking into a tsunami of chaos. We see it in terms of the continuing danger of an escalating war crisis. We see it with the collapse of the financial system, collapse of physical economy. Just to review a few of these salient features should give you a sense of why it is we must act. We cannot just sit back and accept this as business as usual or the new normal. For example, there's no let-up at all in Western propaganda for war against Russia and China. And what it looks like is the attempt to either go to a permanent status of war with a war economy of austerity and shortages, or the idea that we can proceed to a limited nuclear war, which will not lead to the annihilation of the world's population. That's the kind of insanity we're seeing from layers of governments and from political and military leaders. For example, there's a promise for more weapons for Ukraine. The Ukrainian army is being decimated. For what reason? Because the West has a desire to weaken and destroy Russia. And the Ukrainian population is paying the ultimate price for that. And we're seeing a similar threat against China now, following the propaganda stunt of Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taiwan. There are more weapons being promised for Ukraine. President Zelensky of Ukraine is now urging that Russians be banned from traveling outside of Russia. You're going to lock all the Russian people into Russia? That's the essence of democracy? Now we have the Ukrainian government suspending the flow of oil, Russian oil, through the southern branch of the oil pipeline, which goes through Ukraine to provide oil for Slovakia, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. And the reason is because the Russians are sanctioned, so they can't pay to have the oil flow through there. Now, the moves against China continue to escalate with discussions of how it is that the West can decouple from China without disrupting Western the Western economies. Now, here's something that I think is not being reported at all. There are warnings of the threats to European countries of energy shortages in an extremely cold winter. But we have a new report from England, from the United Kingdom, that the energy costs for households in Britain will more than double this winter. The estimate is a 113% increase. And according to this report from an research institute in Cornwall, this means that 1/3 to 1/2 of British households will face fuel poverty. Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown issued a report on this. He described this as a financial time bomb. He said that 54% will face, quote, fuel poverty, unquote. He said pensioners will have to choose between feeding electricity meters or feeding themselves. And he said a generation of young children will live under conditions which resemble, quote, shameful scenes from a Dickens novel. So this is what the policies of green economic policies of the European Union, of the United Kingdom, of the United States is bringing online. Now, then we have the disgraceful Justice Department FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago, the residence of former President Donald Trump. This was an unprecedented and unconscionable action. If they're seeking documents, why not do it the normal way? Provide a subpoena, get cooperation from Trump's lawyers to bring the documents in that are to prove that there are allegedly missing documents, if that's what they're trying to do. So far, there's been no explanation from the Department of Justice or from Attorney General Merrick Garland. But this is a deliberate provocation. And this was addressed by U.S. Senate candidate Diane Sayre, who's running for Senate in New York State against Charles Schumer. She denounced it as, quote, an unwarranted assault on the residence and person of Donald Trump, unquote. But she said it's also an assault on the office of the presidency, continuing the lawless behavior of the permanent bureaucracy of the Department of Justice. Now, this kind of action is designed to provoke an escalation of the polarization, which we've seen increasing in the United States since the election of Donald Trump. And while the Democrats and the media are blaming it on Trump, the reality is that there was an operation from the FBI, from the Department of Justice, from the intelligence community, in collaboration with the British intelligence community, including GCHQ and MI6, to disrupt the United States politically, going back to the 2016 election. And it's been relentless. We've seen the lies exposed, the Steele report, the dossier, and so on. All of these things have been proven to be fraud, and yet they continue with no consequences. Yes, a couple FBI agents were demoted or fired. There were the hearings that were conducted, or the ongoing investigation underway. But so far, the media is sticking to the line that it was Trump who caused this. And as a result, the people who acted illegally, as they have done since the 80s with the prosecution and persecution of Lyndon LaRouche, have had no consequences for their illegal actions. Now, why is all of this happening? Why are we facing this maximum chaos scenario? It goes back to an event which occurred almost 51 years ago, on August 15th, 1971, when a rather hapless president, Richard Nixon, was convinced by George Shultz, by Paul Volcker, and others of his entourage that the US dollar was under attack and there needed to be an end to the financial system that was set up at the end of World War II called the Bretton Woods system. Now, as we've reported, there were some problems with the Bretton Woods system because it was never fully implemented the way Franklin Roosevelt intended, as a system that would allow for a proper decolonization to occur with the export of U.S. capital goods, with investment into U.S. physical economy. That didn't happen. Nevertheless, there were certain basics of the Bretton Woods system, including a gold reserve system, a fixed exchange rate, which limited the role of the speculators. But on August 15th, 1971, Nixon put an end to that as the Shultz-Volcker team ganged up on him and convinced Treasury Secretary John Connally to tell Nixon that the Bretton Woods system had to come to an end. That opened the gates to 50 years of the reduction of investment in physical goods production. It opened the door for green, unscientific, anti-growth, population reduction policies that we now see being implemented across the board. And it meant that the developing sector was not entitled or not given the right to develop, but was set up as a cheap labor source, cheap raw material source for global corporate cartels. That system has been looted to the bone. And now there's a move toward a new system called the Great Reset, in which central banks will dictate fiscal policy, that is economic policy to nations, over and above sovereign constitutional forms of government. For the United States, that's throwing out the Constitution. So why would it be surprising to see the Justice Department conduct the kind of raid they did against President Trump when there's an ignoring of the basic principles of our Constitution across the board? This has set up the scenario for maximum chaos, of war, of austerity, of unnecessary deaths from starvation, from lack of medical care. That's the world we live in today. It doesn't have to be. There are remedies, and the Schiller Institute continues to put forward those solutions. I urge all of you to join with us in our fight to restore the principles that Lyndon LaRouche fought his whole life to bring back onto the table, to reverse the 51-year drift into a casino economy and a return to an economy based on principles of science and technology and the central principle of the sanctity of human life. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you again tomorrow.